Welcome to a show that has no name. I am TP Grant, and this is my new show. This is the inaugural run for a podcast, video podcast that my goal is to have a name by the time this goes up on bloodyelbow.com on Tuesday, and a show that is going to seek to break down MMA events after they happen in a way that treats this sport like a sport. We're going to talk about action inside the cage. We're going to talk about big picture implications um, on fighters, on divisions, a little bit potentially on the business aspect of sport. But what can I assure the viewer that you will not be hearing much of is much about the entertainment value of a card, um, prognostication on business ramifications or things like that. We're going to keep it very much focused on what happened in the cage, technical aspects of fighting, um, matchups, and really kind of talking about the things that we like about MMA as opposed to a lot of the things about oversaturation and the business side of things, and is the UFC or Bellator making the right move in the right market sort of thing. We're going to try to steer clear of those topics as there's plenty of people to talk about those. Once again, I am your host, TP Grant. I am from BloodyElbow.com. And we will be recording this show. I can't assure you that the live recording of this show will be on a regular schedule, but the show will be up on Tuesdays on BloodyElbow.com with an actual name. And we're here with a triple header of MMA to talk about. And another thing I'll say about this show that sets it up nicely for is that this show is not a recap show. It is not a results show. If a fight was not worth talking about in terms of sporting implications, this show will not talk about it. There's already fantastic post-fight shows that go up the night of events, and they talk about every single fight. And I highly recommend them. The Sixth Round on Bloody Elbow, the Beatdown After the Bell on Sure Dog Radio, both fantastic shows. I listened to them before recording this show. And the goal of this show is to provide perspective on the big fights. And we have a lot to talk about. We're going to take today, probably about 40 minutes and run through these. I would like for the show to usually run about an hour, but there were some serious technical issues on getting Google Plus to actually work and actually create this video. So we're going to have a slightly abbreviated show. So that's to be expected. The first time you do anything, it's terrible. I fully expect to look back on the show in about 1 year and be absolutely mortified. All right, so we're going to start looking down the lineup. We're going to start with World Series of Fighting and move our way on up in terms of promotional relevance. Let's be honest, World Series of Fighting probably not going to be around that much longer, but still has relevant action going down in the cage. Starting off with Jessica Aguilar, who had a pretty solid performance, I would say. Caladrina Ferraria gave her a bit more trouble than I think many people were expecting. And I think that's for two primary reasons. Number one, Jessica Aguilar, very accomplished fighter, very good fighter, on the end of what would be considered the peak career arc. She's coming up on her 9th year of professional fighting. She's kind of a later generation of MMA fighters for women's MMA. The sport has not passed her by, but in terms of athletic ability, she's never really been like top shelf athlete in that division. So in that fight, I think we saw a bit of that come out in the sense that Ferraria was able to really go to work on Aguilar at times, and Aguilar really had to fall back on her deeper technical knowledge of clinch fighting, of ground fighting, to really pull this fight out. And it was a solid performance by Aguilar. And I can't say that I paid too close attention to it because we had so many fights going on at once. But my big takeaway was that Aguilar retains her spot as a relevant 115-pound fighter in women's MMA. But she's clearly she appears to be somewhat in decline. The sport is evolving very quickly. Women's MMA, there's money coming into it. There's new athletes coming into it, and it's changing rapidly. We're seeing a growth that we saw in men's MMA um, about 10 years ago, somewhere within the last decade or so. And women's MMA is now experiencing a similar, not as severe of a boom, not as serious as a boom, but I think we're seeing now. We're seeing that the old guard is aging a bit faster than we'd expect because despite the fact that she's 33, Aguilar does appear to be on the end of her career arc. And she seems to be hitting the end of her peak performances and appears to be starting her decline. Solid performance, Jessica Aguilar. I really hope we will see her in the new UFC 150-pound division when World Series of Fighting eventually calls it quits, which should not be too long from now, because all signs point to that promotion being on its way out. The other fight that I think was worth discussing in terms of bigger picture things is Justin Gaethje beating Melvin Guillard in what was a more competitive fight that I think a lot of people anticipated. And I think that was for a couple of reasons. Number one, Gaethje appeared to be pretty emotionally not invested in this fight, but he seemed to be very emotionally. He got emotional. I mean, he was clearly upset at Guillard in the pre-fight interviews in the locker room. Guillard obviously missed weight, probably done as a lightweight. Guillard's likely going to be moving up to 170 pounds, and it really seemed like Gaethje wanted to punish him for missing weight, for making it not a title fight, and as a result, he got over aggressive. Not even a little over aggressive. He got over aggressive, and the result of that was that Guillard was able to move well. He was working a jab very, very well, and he was keeping that jab in Gaethje's face pretty much the entire first round. It was making it really hard for Gaethje to get off and really land his offense. And to Gaethje's credit, he really locked in on what was working for him, what was causing him to be successful, which was leg kicks. And as the fight went on, Gaethje adjusted his strategy, became more deliberate with the leg kicks, became more committed to the leg kicks, and as a result, he really, really damaged Guillard, and he was putting Guillard's back against the fence pretty consistently in the fight, and Guillard was moving pretty well and getting out of the bad situations because Gaethje has pretty nasty power in his hands, really natural puncher, can put a real hurting on people, and Guillard seemed very well prepared for that. And by the end of the fight, Gaethje had completely taken away Guillard's ability to move and had him firmly trapped against the fence. And while he wasn't able to get a finish, and while Guillard somehow got a judge's scorecard, that fight was pretty much all Gaethje from about the second half of the second half of the second round on. Gaethje really took control of that fight. And that pretty much sums up my thoughts on World Series of Fighting. David Branch got a win over Yushin Nakami, knockout. It was very surprising. I think most MMA fans had turned off World Series of Fighting at that point and had moved on to Bellator and the UFC. But extraordinarily surprising result there, to say the least. I mean, I could have seen Yushin Okami losing this fight in a couple different manners to David Branch, but I did not expect Branch to knock Okami out, that especially as quickly as he did. But in the long run, it doesn't end up meaning much. Branch is the champion for World Series of Fighting at middleweight. Excellent for him. And I don't think either one of them is going to be coming back to the UFC. So Bellator may end up being a home for Branch. I'm not sure what the future holds for Okami, as Bellator, which we're going to move to next, has clearly made a move to being more like Strikeforce and more into the showman side of the fight business. And I'm not sure Okami fits into that business model the way that Branch would, where Branch can at least deliver some exciting fights and some exciting moments. And then we're talking about Bellator. Let's move on to Bellator. Uh, Starting off, the Bellator card was structured very similarly, and I apologize for glancing off to the side here. My current situation with my laptop is that I need to have all my notes on an additional computer over to the side here. We're looking to address that issue in the near future, but until then, you may get shots of me profile. The Bellator card. It very much resembled the old Strikeforce Scott Coker model, where we have a meaningful MMA fight, a very meaningful MMA fight with Will Brooks and Michael Chandler. We have a couple prospects and names getting bounce back matches or kind of squash matches in um, Mike Richmond, a prospect for Bellator, getting what was a pretty easy fight with Nam Phan. Nam Phan, solid, well-rounded fighter, but he doesn't have a standout skill, and he tends to get beat up quite a bit on the feet, if even in fights he wins. And Mike Richmond just brings too much power to the table for that particular style to work against him. Mike Richmond blows the doors off Nam Phan, gets a very impressive win over a name people are familiar with through the Ultimate Fighter, through the UFC. So a stepping stone sort of bout for Richmond. Muhammad Lawal just runs over Joe Vidapo, and Lawal looked very good, and he's a really interesting case because the thing about Lawal is he clearly has an outstanding skill. His wrestling is top notch, legitimately one of the best credentialed wrestlers in MMA, and has transferred his wrestling game to MMA very well. His ground fighting is in line with the current MMA metagame and plays to his strengths very well. Lawal is not really a submission fighter. He's not really a big guard passer. He's big, he's strong, and he's got really technical rides. So he beats guys up when they're on their back in the guard. And when they go to escape, when they try to escape to their feet, he snatches up the riding position, the turtle position, and traps them on all fours and throws punches under the armpits, beats them over the side of the ear, and really makes their life miserable. And he really drives home the idea that position, that riding position, is a dominant position in MMA when strikes are involved. And he does a fantastic job with it. So the one part of his game that doesn't seem to match up is his striking game. His striking game seems very much out of the 2006. He's training. He's training boxing, and his boxing is all right. It's not bad. It's technically sound in some aspects. Some of it's very technically unsound. But it doesn't match with anything else that he does. It stands apart from his game. It does not lead to his wrestling whatsoever. And as a result, Muhammad Lawal is very much either in boxing mode or in wrestling mode when he's on the feet. And it's very obvious when he switches between the two. And as a result, it makes both of them less effective. He is such an outstanding wrestler that it doesn't have as big of an impact on his wrestling as it does his boxing. His boxing normally proves not to be very effective, though he was able to catch Viapo on the feet and set him up, set up the final finish on the feet. It's just an interesting. It speaks to that idea that we're not really sure how to train for MMA at this point, and Lawal's theory is that he's seeking out some of the best boxing instruction he can find with Floyd Mayweather Sr. and training alongside one of the best boxers, which sounds great, but in actual application to MMA, it doesn't work, and because it doesn't feed into the rest of the sport of his game. It doesn't feed into his wrestling. It doesn't really deal with striking in transition. It doesn't really deal that much with striking in the clinch. And as a result, he's a less accomplished fighter than he really should be, considering the level of athleticism, the level of wrestling, and the level of just general fight intelligence that Muhammad Lawal has. I mean, he's not a stupid man. He understands fighting, but just the way he's putting together the skills he has right now, it seems to be something that's holding him a bit back. And he would most certainly be better served to be training with a top-notch MMA striking coach at this point, as opposed to just with a boxing coach. Uh, so Muhammad Lawal gets a nice, easy win. Moving up to the title fight, Will Brooks versus Michael Chandler, and this was a fantastic fight. Um, Chandler came out strong first 2 rounds. Seemed to be, while he was taking the rounds on pretty much everyone's scorecards, um, it was pretty clear that he was still very hittable, which is a problem that he's had, and and really what sealed this fight. Which I had, again, this is part of the issue with having the triple header that we did. Um, when you're watching 2 fights at the same time, it's very hard to come away with a very detailed look at a fight. But I felt the Brooks's striking at range was clearly, it was going well for him, and Chandler was working very, very hard to get on the inside, turn it into a wrestling match, turn it into more of an uh, inside boxing sort of contest. And when Chandler went for a spinning inner thigh throw in the 3rd round, Brooks did an excellent job keeping his base, landing on all fours. They landed next to each other, and they both scrambled to their feet. And in that scramble, Brooks landed just a great punch from his knees. A beautiful, like, textbook transition punch that clearly disrupted Michael Chandler and completely separated him from reality. I believe Chandler has since said that he thought he had been poked in the eye, and as a result, turned to the referee to start complaining, but was clearly not entirely there. Um, and Will Brooks fouled up, finished the fight with some pretty nasty strikes against the cage, and has, in my opinion, cemented himself as a top 10 lightweight in the sport. He looked really fantastic. He's got a great transition game. He was able to fight off Michael Chandler, who appears to be a pretty elite wrestler within the lightweight division. And he appears to be kind of like a Chad Mendes type in the lightweight division, minus the, I don't even know, minus the choke game, but Chandler's pretty all around solid fighter. And Brooks did an excellent job surviving the early onslaught and then finding an opportunity. And when opportunity presented itself, just exploiting it to the hilt and really, really getting after Chandler once he had him hurt. So that was, all in all, a pretty outstanding night of fights. We're not going to talk about Stephan Bonner and Tito Ortiz, as the fight was terrible. The implications of it are absolutely nil. There's no implications for it. And in general, it seems that Bellator is going the direction of being very much an alternative to the UFC product, where they're going to give you some meaningful MMA fights. They're going to present to you some cotton candy style fights, such as Melvin Manhoff versus Joe Schilling, which fun fight, but has no real. There's nothing going forward off of that. It was 2 kickboxers, one with significantly more MMA success and MMA experience in Manhoff, and one with not a great deal of MMA success and not a great deal of MMA experience in Joe Schilling. Joe Schilling, the better kickboxer, showed it there. Took a hook from Manhoff. Manhoff thought he had him hurt, charged forward and walked right into a combination and got put down. Very fun fight. Enjoyed watching it, but it's more of a fight to keep people's eyeballs on the product, and then deliver the audience to a more meaningful fight, such as a Chandler, or deliver them to fights where you have a star like a Mo Lawal that you're attempting to build up, and get fan eyeballs on, so you can get him into a more meaningful fight with a larger audience. which was the Scott Coker's formula in Strikeforce, and frankly, it was working pretty well until they had the carpet pulled out from under them. When the backers sold to the UFC. So it looks like things are going business wise, things are going up for Bellator, which is good. The UFC competition in the big picture is a thing that benefits fighters. Promotional competition drives fighter prices up. Um, it creates competition. It will hopefully improve um, qualities of cards because while we're not going to get too much into it, pretty much it took us 3 MMA cards in one night to get one decent night of fights. If any one of these cards has been on a standalone on any given night, this would have been an utterly forgettable night of fights. Let's move to the UFC. We are not going to talk about any of the Ultimate Fighter Latin America fights, as those fighters are not even really um, they're not even really worth myself, Zane Simon, and Patrick Wyman talking about on the MMA Prospectus show that we do together, which is a show that airs again on Bloody Elbow, focusing on prospects in MMA. None of them even warrant talking about on there. They certainly don't warrant talking about on this show. So we're going to start with Jessica Eye and Leslie Smith, which, um, if you did not see, ended when Leslie Smith's cauliflower ear exploded, and that is not hyperbole. It exploded like a squib out of a movie and shot blood into the air. And up until then, up until the fight was stopped because Leslie Smith's ear was hanging off of her head, Jessica Eye was just dominating this fight. And this goes to the idea again that in women's MMA, athletes are still fairly rare. And Jessica Eye is a pretty superior athlete. She's a cut below the super elite athlete that you would expect out of, or that you see out of a Ronda Rousey or a Sarah McMahon, who are both just that next level sort of athlete, that Olympic athlete. But Jessica Eye is still a really good athlete. She's very good. She's very strong. She's very fast. And that speed was really the difference, as Leslie Smith looked like she was moving through water to get to Jessica Eye. Jessica Eye stayed on the outside. Jessica Eye basically has 3 strikes that she likes to throw. She throws a jab, a cross, and an outside leg kick, and occasionally an inside leg kick. And that's all it took to establish range against Leslie Smith, because she had such a speed advantage. She had such a footwork advantage as Leslie Smith kind of shuffled forward, looking to land her hooks, turned it into more of a brawling toe-to-toe affair. And I was really able to kind of establish her range just outside of Smith's range, stop Smith from effectively getting into the clinch and dirty fighting on the inside. And every time Smith tried to close distance, she paid for it with big punches. If this fight had not been stopped due to the ear, Smith would have just been walking into more and more of a beating. Smith is tough as heck. She's one hell of a fighter. And it's a tough way to lose, but it was the right call to stop that fight because her ear was hanging off of her head. It was something to behold. I'm sure the producers at FS1 were just thrilled that was on their air. So really solid performance for Jessica Eye. Leslie Smith is not an easy fight. She's a very, very tough test, and will likely continue to have a place in the UFC's women bantamweight division, as she kind of serves as that gatekeeper to the top 10 as the division continues to grow. Leslie Smith will have a place as an action fighter and as a gatekeeper. They just need to stop tossing her in there with legitimate top 8, top 5 kind of competition, and we'll get much better performances out of Smith. Ricardo Lamas, moving on, came in. He got a really solid, really excellent win over Dennis Bermudez. And while Lamas still looked very hittable on the feet and got into a few exchanges with Dennis Bermudez, it's hard to fault him because he's going to win those kind of exchanges with Dennis Bermudez. That's his kind of fight. And Bermudez worked very hard on getting this fight to the ground, and Lamas really showed off some excellent counter wrestling. using the front headlock position to prevent um, Bermudez from getting him down, uh, using the cage well, and the entire time looked to be setting up guillotines. Lamas was looking for guillotines every time he was in defending a takedown. And Bermudez was doing quite a good job of stopping them until Bermudez got dropped by what appeared to be a jab. Even on the replay, it looks like that he was dropped with a jab. He hits the ground, and Lamas just pounces with an excellent guillotine attack. The transition was wonderful. He slid right in, got his lower leg, um, got one leg underneath the body, shin against the stomach, threw the other leg over, and really trapped Bermudez in. Bermudez's only move, because of the leg thrown over his back, was to move into the choke, which is a pretty classic. The Team Alpha Male guys do this choke a lot. Marcelo Garcia is a big fan of it. The not closed guard guillotine, in fact, like an open guard guillotine. At no point one full side of the chokey's body is open, and they move in that direction, and allows you to sweep them into mount with the mounted guillotine, which is one of the highest percentage submissions there is. It's just absolutely awful to be in. The pressure on the neck is pretty intense. It can be, even if the choke doesn't get you, it can be a pretty awful neck crank. So it's one of the most high percentage submissions. It takes basically no strength to finish, and because you're using your entire body in such an efficient manner. And for Ricardo Lamas, really excellent fight. Demonstrates that for all of our talk, Jose Aldo is still a fantastic fighter, that he was able to so easily deal with Ricardo Lamas, but Ricardo Lamas is able to get back in with the contenders and look as dominant and as good as he did. So fantastic win for Ricardo Lamas. And there's some talk about what he'll do next. He wants Conor McGregor. I doubt the UFC will do that. I think the UFC wants Conor McGregor in a title fight as soon as possible, and I can't fault them for that. I think a Conor McGregor Jose Aldo fight is pretty excellent, both stylistically and in terms of just as a draw, as an interesting fight. It is fantastically interesting, which is why I think Dennis Seaver, Conor McGregor is happening fairly soon. It's happening in January, a fairly quick turnaround. Just about 3 months off or 4 months off uh, for McGregor after he beats Seaver, which I don't think will be a huge problem for McGregor. I think he's a lot faster than Seaver. I think he's more accurate. I think he's overall better athlete. Then I think we see McGregor getting a title shot, and Ricardo Lamas left on the outside, potentially being maybe held in reserve. Maybe they get him another fight, and maybe he's the first defense for McGregor. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Lamas moving forward, because I don't think we'll be seeing a Lamas Aldo rematch anytime in the near future. I feel Ricardo Lamas is got the long road back to a title shot. He's clearly one of the best 5 fighters in the division, and it'll take a little. I think we're gonna have to see the division shake out to see exactly what they want to do with him next. Moving up the card, we're gonna go to the co-main event: Kelvin Gastelum versus Jake Ellenberger, and Gastelum just having a really legitimizing breakout performance. He fully appears to be the best fighter off of the Ultimate Fighter in the history of the show at this point. I know we had Rashad Evans, who turned into Rashad Evans is the traditional and the correct answer to the question of who is the best fighter off of the Ultimate Fighter to this point. UFC light heavyweight champion, perennial top 5 light heavyweight, completely shed the tough label. No one ever thinks of Rashad Evans as an Ultimate Fighter anymore. Kevin Gastelum, however, appears to be on the Chris Weidman prospect track. He is burning through guys. He looks better each time out. His game looks more complete. His game appears to have a new wrinkle each time he comes out. And against Jake Ellenberger, he was facing a still dangerous fighter in Ellenberger. I think we're all over the idea that Jake Ellenberger is going to be a title contender. I think on MMA Perspectives, I think Zane and Patrick and myself all agreed that Ellenberger is likely past his peak as a fighter. Despite the fact that he is only 29 years old. He's been fighting for about 10 years at this point. He has 40 fights on his record. I'm sorry. He's got nearly 40 fights on his record. He's been through. He's already had almost a full MMA career at this point. There are fighters with full fleshed out MMA careers who have done less than this man. But still has that serious power, still can get hyper aggressive. And Gastelum kept Ellenberger backing up. Ellenberger seemed content to play counter striker, which it really doesn't suit his game. I feel like Ellenberger is at his best when he's coming forward, when he's getting aggressive, when he's putting guys backs to the cage. But he seems very determined to kind of, as another podcast, Heavy Hands, which is an absolutely phenomenal podcast that will come out probably sometime around Thursday, breaking down this event, which features Bloody Elbow, striking analyst, and Sherdog fight breakdown guru, Connor Rebush and Patrick Wyman, both fantastic, talking technical elements of striking, and they both pointed out how Ellenberger seems to want to become a finesse, nuanced boxer. And I think that continued to play out here, that Ellenberger is playing a striking game that does not fit with his skill set at all. And Gastelum was able to actually put Ellenberger's back on the cage in several instances and go to work on him. And then at one point, Ellenberger clinches, ducks under, gets to Gastelum, gets belly to back with Gastelum, and goes for a pickup slam. And we have an absolutely phenomenal sit out by Gastelum, get to the back, hooks in, and then sinks the choke in a really, really nice piece of transitional grappling. And what really made me happy about this is that it's pure fundamentals, and it's fundamentals of two different grappling sports. But I mean, the sit out to spinning to the back is classic wrestling. It is a fundamental move in wrestling that everyone learns, and it's taught in jiu-jitsu as well. It's like the sit out is not like a mystery to jiu-jitsu players. The spinning to the back on the turtle is obviously not unheard of in jiu-jitsu tournaments. But when you're talking about wrestlers and dealing with that riding position, the sit out is as fundamental as like a hip escape to a jiu-jitsu player. It's a really basic move. To see Gastelum apply two sets of fundamentals from two different grappling arts in such a seamless way, in such an effective way in a high-level MMA fight is really encouraging. That's the kind of stuff that you look for in a top-level dude, to just so quickly turn the tables on a guy when a fight gets into his realm. For Gastelum, which is the ground, he is primarily a ground fighter. To just so authoritatively take over the fight and finish it the moment it got into his realm of fighting was very, very impressive. For Gastelum, I think he needs to be fighting a top 10 welterweight in his next fight. We need to find out if he is. Worthy of title consideration. And the fight on the TJ DeSantis Sherdog threw out the idea of him fighting Tyron Woodley, and I think that's the perfect fight. How does he respond to a guy who is a better wrestler and potentially a better athlete? How does Gastelum deal with that? How does he deal with a guy that he might not be able to take down? How does he deal with a guy who's not going to leave him a ton of space to scramble on the ground? I think that's a fantastic fight. I think that would be the natural next fight to make. For Tyron Woodley, it might be something of a step backwards, but I think that would be I think that would be the ideal situation because really want to find out if I really want to find out if um, Kelvin Gastelum is the real deal, and if he is on that that John Jones, Chris Weidman, just absolute gold plated elevator to the top sort of career path. Because right now it looks like he could be. We need to see him in there against a top flight guy, but keep in mind. Um, and if you're not sold on Gastelum yet, I don't blame you, and I can't criticize you because I wasn't sold on. I don't think anyone is ever 100% sold on a fighter. Even when it was John Jones, when he jumped in to face Ryan Bader, people wanted to know what his wrestling would look like. When he jumped in to face Shogun, there were some people, including myself, who thought it was too much, too fast for him. And the only way to find out is get in there and to see how they respond. And if Gastelum runs through a top 10 guy like Tyrone Woodley, we might have something special on our hands. Um, all right. Speaking of special, let's wrap this thing up. Let's move to the main event: Fabricio Werdum versus Mark Hunt for the interim UFC light heavyweight title, not light heavyweight title, heavyweight title. Um, a really fantastic fight. It's we're really starting to see, even with all this new talent emerging in MMA, with the renaissance of Robbie Lawler, with this fight, with Fabricio Werdum being 37 and having fought since having he had a career in Pride, Mark Hunt having a fully fleshed kickboxing career in K1, fighting in Pride, coming over to the UFC. We're really starting to see that in a sport as complex and as technical as MMA, that experience really does matter, and that even if there isn't like a super phenom in a division, if there isn't a John Jones or a Chris Weidman who's just running through people, that fighters can adapt their games. They can account for declining athleticism and just declining physical abilities with overall, fight savvy and and compete on elite levels. And that's pretty much exactly what Mark Hunt has done. Mark Hunt is not the same fighter that he was back when he was having like an all-time classic kickboxing match with Ray Sefo and just letting Sefo hit him in the face and laughing at him and making faces at him. That's not Mark Hunt anymore. Mark Hunt is dramatically a less active fighter in the cage. He throws way less in terms of output. He picks his spots to engage. Um, he's really upped his clinch fighting is really fantastic. Clinching with this man and trying to grapple with this man on the ground must be akin to trying to grapple with a bowling ball. It looks incredibly difficult to get a handle on this guy and to control him. And Hunt has accounted for the fact that he's a bit slower and that he gets tired a bit faster by really kind of shaving down his game and really picking his spots and maximizing everything that he does. And meanwhile, Fabricio Werdum has built a incredibly functional striking game that centers around the fact that pretty much no one wants to take Fabricio Werdum down. The people ask, like, people will talk about the benefit of jiu-jitsu in current MMA, or the benefit of having a good guard, because guard play, closed guard play is essentially it's not useless in MMA, but it is not an A level skill anymore that you need to have to succeed. And if it is your A level skill, it's a pretty easy one to avoid. Avoiding the closed guard, if you're an experienced and knowledgeable grappler, is not that difficult. Especially in no-gi, where it's very hard to force someone into their knees, into the closed guard, if they don't want to be there. So where Doom's guard acts as his defensive wrestling. It is his takedown defense. There are very few people who want to take him down and deal with that guard. If you do take him down and he does manage to reestablish that guard, you're not going to spend the entire round there holding him down and winning the round. Mark Hunt did probably just enough in Werdum's guard to win, even if he hadn't been beating Werdum clearly on the feet. He probably did just enough in the guard to sway most judges into letting him win the round. But as soon as he did that, he was out of there. Um, so because of that, Werdum can build a fairly aggressive striking game. Where he can pretty reliably he can come forward without a lot of fear of guys shooting on for takedowns on him. He can play more of a kicking game without worrying about guys catching a kick and taking him down, because if he gets taken down, that's where he'd prefer to be anyway. So Werdum's built a very a forward moving, aggressive striking game that both Conor Rebush and Patrick Wyman on Heavy Hands termed correctly as a rhythm striking game. Werdum very much needs to get into the flow of the fight to become effective. And Mark Hunt completely kept him from getting into the flow of the fight. Everything was going Hunt's way. Hunt had a ground exchange where I think Werdum's plan was to get Hunt tired. I don't think Werdum was going to look to finish the fight in the first round. Even when he had Hunt in the guard, he was trying to get control of Hunt's left arm. He was trying to bring his shin into Hunt's left bicep and set up the triangle. But I don't think we were going to see Werdum going all out for a finish from his guard, because he knew that he had 5 rounds in thin air to try to wear Mark Hunt down, who historically has not had the best cardio. So I feel like Werdum was fairly content losing the first round, and that he only needed to survive that first round. He got hit a lot more. I'm not saying that when he started getting hit that I didn't think the fight might end. But I feel like Werdum's first round, the fact that he lost it, likely they were planning. I'd say it's entirely possible that Werdum planned on not giving the first round away, but not really seeking to contest the first round that heavily. And Mark Hunt seemed to be firing on all cylinders. Everything he wanted to do was going very well. And Hunt's a very adaptive fighter. He's a very tactical fighter. He will adjust to you in the cage, which is something that you don't see a ton of fighters do. And one of those instances of experience being a real factor, because Hunt will he's a computer. He takes data. He takes data points that you give him. He processes it, and he comes up with a solution to what you're doing. And something in there that he saw was causing Hunt to duck his head down. And Werdum saw that and really blasted him with a flying knee. That was just fantastic to see, because knees at range are something that you see more in high level kickboxing, and they're not how you see them in MMA at most times, where guys seem to throw them because they have a lot of forward momentum and they're not sure what else to do other than throw like a knee at range, or throw like a flying knee. But it's really refreshing to see a guy kind of similar to what Donald Cerrone does, where they set up a knee at range, and that knee was perfectly set up. And Werdum connected so solidly, it put Hunt down. And then the follow-up on the ground, I thought the stoppage by Herb Dean was completely correct. Hunt ate something like 15 shots from Werdum unanswered, and managed right when Dean stepped in to throw a single like back fist from the ground. I don't consider that to be enough of an intelligence defense to warrant the fight continuing. It was a solid performance by both fighters. For Werdum, I'm still not confident against Cain Velasquez. I think against Cain Velasquez, it'll be a mostly standing affair. I don't think Cain wants to go too much on the ground until he can get Werdum a little tired. Once I think they get into later rounds, and Cain with his amazing cardio, I think will then hit the ground with Werdum and really work him over on the ground, because when you're exhausted, it doesn't matter how good your grappling is. It just doesn't matter. If you're too tired to grapple, you can have all the world championships in the world and it won't help you. But if Cain is out for any extended period of time, and they ended up doing the Junior Dos Santos rematch with Werdum, which I've been hearing rumblings of, I don't think that fight goes well for Werdum either. I think he's more competitive with Junior Dos Santos than he was in the first time around, but I think that fight's still Junior. I think Junior has all the abilities that made Mark Hunt successful against Werdum, except he's faster and bigger and hits harder currently than Hunt does currently, though historically Hunt hit really, really hard. Um, so I think we're doomed. While I'm a big fan of his, while I really enjoy his fights, I don't think we see him holding a real, holding the actual unified UFC heavyweight title anytime soon. I think he's solidly the number 3 heavyweight in the world, which is fantastic. That there's nothing wrong with that. But there's just 2 guys in the world better than him, and that's how the sport goes sometimes. So, all right. Well, that was our quick rundown, and we ended up actually getting closer to the hour that I wanted. Um, so keep in mind this show is going to be a process. I'm already looking to get some better equipment so that I can face the same direction as my notes, and better sound quality, better video quality will all hopefully be coming, as well as guests. This first time was just me, but I'm sure most of you don't want to just look at me the whole time. I'm sure you'd rather hear people and have me speak to people who know more on certain issues than me. Or just more than me in general. It's not that hard to find people who know more than me about anything. Um, so guests will be something that this show will hope to have in the future, as well as interaction with viewers. If you have any questions in an upcoming UFC event, we are going to be covering for this. I think the only type of card we will not cover on here will be Fight Pass exclusive cards, the cards that are exclusively on Fight Pass. I think I will let those go. But anything on TV, an FS1 card or a pay-per-view card or a Fox card, this show will cover. So if you have questions, send them to me. I would love to read them on the air. I would really be excited to answer them. So we'll be moving forward with this. The first time you do anything, it's awful. So hopefully the show improves enough that I can be mortified when I look back on this in 6 months. So have a fantastic day.